Hey guys, this is Lindsay Schnorr. Welcome to my podcast, Known to be Known. I want to inspire you to wonder and question and think for yourself rather than tell you what to think as we go on a journey to get to know God. I'd like to suggest that God's desire was never to get you to heaven, but to get heaven through you, and that He actually gave us this answer to what eternal life looks like in John 17:3, saying that eternal life is this, that we would know God as the one true God and Jesus Christ whom He sent. You see, He gave us an endgame and a timeline, relationship forever. I believe that as we get to know Him, He's made known through our lives, and evangelism, sharing the gospel, actually looks and sounds a lot like you and your life. You ready for an adventure? Let's go. Hello, everybody. It's a good day, and it is 2025. I don't know if anybody else feels like that's crazy, but I remember ringing in the new year in the millennium, and I was sitting next to my husband, and I said, you know what's crazy is that was 25 years ago, and I was 16 then. So I've essentially lived a 25-year-old lifetime and a 16-year-old lifetime, which feels absolutely crazy. So that's a deep thought to begin with, but it's been a hot minute and there has been a lot going on. And I can assume from talking to friends and people across the world that this has been a 3 months, huh? 2024 was a year, and the last 3 months were definitely a push to get into 2025. And I'm in full agreement with what you're hearing a lot of prominent voices talking about, that there's something new, that Isaiah 43 is a very real word for everyone right now. And that part of seeing the new things that God is doing is requiring us to not look backwards and to forget the former things. I wanted to remind you of the podcast of New versus Next. I think it was almost 2 years ago, but it's a very timely thing that if you're coming in new right now or you're looking for something to go listen and watch, go back to the podcast about New versus Next. And I think it's super relevant right now. But essentially, having this perspective that next is predicated upon things that we actually understand and have experienced, but new has no context. New requires full surrender, full creativity, if you will, to step into something that you don't have infrastructure for. You don't have any type of commonality. I'm a little distracted, so let's just point out the glory rays right now that if you are watching this, Jesus Himself has showed up to the podcast. But yeah, aren't those kind of fun right now? But new for 2025, I think Lisa Bevere said it really well on Instagram, is looking at 2024 as a teacher and 2025 as a friend. Coming into this year expectant, coming into this year not being afraid, not being in this like braced for something bad to happen, but this space of realizing that we have been set up for something really amazing. And I think that's where we're going to start today. That amidst a lot of things that have been happening in my own personal life, what you have seen, it might have even drawn you to this particular podcast episode, is that I'm releasing my first single. What the heck? Crazy. If you've listened to any of my history that I did in the podcast in earlier seasons, it was a dream of mine as a young woman, and even what I pursued in college to do music professionally. I was a music vocal performance major, wanted to go after Broadway, was classically trained by some really incredible people. And because of so many different factors, and we'll just say a lot of it was character development and maturity, those doors were shut. And I walked away from that whole life. And then years later, had the opportunity and honor to become a worship leader and get to learn how to lead people into the presence of God, to give them a way to encounter and worship individually and corporately. And then in that space, be invited back into creating music, and then creating music that God decided needed to be public. So yes, there's a new song. Today, I believe we are January 3rd. You can pre-order it, Lift Up Your Heads, on iTunes, but it goes completely live and available on all streaming, all things. Like, I didn't even know some of these places existed. I think there's like 50 different platforms on January 17th. And I cannot wait to share this experience with you guys. So, here is the story of Lift Up Your Heads, because isn't it fun to know the background of where certain songs come from? I was in Chicago. I believe I could mess yours up a little bit. So go ahead and Google fact check me. But I was in Chicago at what is titled a hub. I think it's Hub is the organization that puts together these ministry events, to see Heidi Baker. I wanted to hear her teach and preach in person. And that was the first time that I was able to get somewhere to see her. And it's really cool because at that stage in my life, so this would have been, I didn't say the year yet, 2022, I was in severe systemic pain. I think it lasted a little over a year, and they could never find out exactly what was going on with me. The diagnosis that I finally ended up with was trigeminal neuralgia, but I had severe pain in my whole head almost always. And it's relevant because I needed to drive to Chicago this particular day to meet my friend to go see Heidi Baker. And I couldn't see. My headache was so bad. And I was ready to not drive to Chicago because it was a 3-hour drive alone. And the Lord told me to push through. So I got in my car, and honestly, I was bawling, and I just started driving. And I texted my friend whom I was meeting there to pray for me. And I was able to get through the 3 hours. The pain didn't go away. It was pretty bad. Honestly, I think most normal human beings were like, what the heck? And outside of, if you have a relationship with God and you hear him cheering you on to do something, most human beings would have just stayed home and been like, it's good. But I did it. I drove there. And I remember getting to the hotel and laying down, and I had like a half hour to nap before it was time to go to the conference. And all the pain went away for a second. Like, there was this time of refreshment. And we get to the conference, and conference was set up for 3 days. I was only attending 2 days because those were the 2 days that Heidi was teaching, and I had things to get back to for my kids. And I wanted to be there because she was doing baptisms as well in the hotel pool. It was really, really cool that I got to watch that. But their setup was, you come in, there's like book sales, and then you have corporate worship, and then the teaching. And we got there and stood in line. And I remember that I started praying for these people in line for healing. And I just love giving you all the details because this is what led up to it. And then they opened the doors for us to go in and sit down for worship. And at this first hub event, I have to be honest, not my style of worship. How many people out there have either had to learn, or you haven't learned yet, that just because worship music is not the genre or style that you are interested in, they all interest God? And I was in this space at that time period to recognize Jesus no matter what. And I'm going to totally fail on the preacher. Oh, guys, he's a foreign guy. German. He's no longer with us. Somebody's going to be screaming this at the screen, and I'll have to write it in the notes. But I was watching old sermons from this gentleman that he would purposely go sit in church services where they were speaking in different languages so that he was not constrained by what he understood, but that he would recognize God. He would recognize Jesus no matter what. And I was kind of in one of these positions where I was like, okay, this is not my style of music. I don't like it. I don't vibe with it, but I'm going to find Jesus in it. And it was like a bunch of middle-aged men that were on drums and guitars and stuff, and very much like Maranatha, am I saying that right, music, just to give you guys a vibe. And maybe 45 minutes, an hour into worship, Holy Spirit just dropped, and it went into spontaneous, that without even realizing it, I just started singing at the top of my lungs, lift up your heads. Lift up your heads, you gates. Lift up your heads that the King of Glory might come in. And this particular encounter, I don't know how many of you guys have experienced this, but it's like revelatory and experiential all at the same time. I had this moment where I was so aware that God was desiring us to come to Him fully mature and able to look Him in the face, which, by the way, I know Old Testament wise, you die, right? And yet, as new creations, and that's one of my passions, is really going after the fullness of what Jesus intended for us to be able to live in. I had this experience as I was shouting and singing at the top of my lungs, that it wasn't just lifting up your heads, you gates, as conduits of praise and worship, but there was a posture change to call people to attention, that you could look Jesus in the face as He came into the throne room, that He's looking for a bride that would connect with Him. And I'm totally failing at words, but I couldn't stop singing it. And this went on for a while. So I know you probably want to hear about listening to Heidi, and it was absolutely amazing. And I was touched and wrecked for life. And maybe that's a different podcast. But that was the start that I remember first hearing this tune. And I came home. And like I said, this was 2022. So what's normal for me is I sit down at my piano daily and I worship. I worship with God. And this song became a anthem almost that grew over the years. And the more that I hung out in Psalm 24, and the more I hung out in pursuing Jesus and what it looked like to have this intimate relationship where He's calling us to not be face down, but like almost like picking up, like how my husband would like pick my face up when we were, going through our wedding vows, like this very gentle, like, look me in the eyes, I love you kind of thing. I didn't really have words for it. It was just the song. So fast forward to 2023, and I started hearing the tune to it. And I did hear part of it in a dream. I can't remember like dates or the fullness of everything, but it's not uncommon for me to hear music in a dream that just kind of hangs out in the back of my brain, and then I put it on the piano. But I heard it, and I started seeing that this song that was in me was a song that would play in the throne room as Jesus would enter. And again, for any of you guys, sorry, just hit the mic. For any of you that want to get weird on extra biblical stuff, I'm just telling you what I experienced. I have experienced watching the Lord have these giant, like, I don't even know what size, maybe 70-foot clear crystal doors that are inlaid in glass, and all you see behind them is clouds and stars, but the stars aren't in nighttime, that these giant doors open and it erupts inside, angelic, human alike, to celebrate the King of Glory coming in. And that at that same time, there's this juxtaposition that that's what it looks like when He's introduced here on the other side of the veil. Forgive me for not being able to like put it into words, but this is what I experienced with this song. And it was just me and Him. And I would experience this in my living room every time I played through it. And then come 2024, right? Because we're in 2025. You guys know I started speaking more regularly. And at the Dream Conference that I did with Dr. Peters, who was on this podcast, I had sat down and they had invited me to lead some worship. The Lord said, go ahead and lead this song. Go ahead and sing this song. And it was the first time publicly that I ever took something that I had developed intimately with the Lord and brought it into the public. And from April until August, I just sang this song and invited people into that experience every opportunity that I had, until you also know I took the worship leader position at our church and then taught my church the song in August or September of this past year. After about the second or third time, I started to hear the chorus. And what's really interesting is the other part of the 3-month blip that you guys don't know about, that when I started third year at Bethel and I started serving Teresa Dedman in Create Academy, she graciously gave me the opportunity to teach her music intensives. And in her wisdom, which was really cool, was like, all right, you do it. So I just kind of dreamt with the Lord on what it looked like to teach people to create musically with him. And I came up with this encounter that led people into places in heaven that Jesus would like to introduce us to, and the frequencies and songs that come from those specific places. Because I mused that in heaven, if there's a throne room, if there's a mansion with many, many rooms for us, there's probably gardens, there's probably cities. We know all these things in part from the Bible, right? But there's probably a lot of places and things that are continually being created. And if that's true, then there's tunes that come from all these places. So not everything's a throne room song. Not everything's a banquet room song. Not everything is a waterfall song or an increase song or a comfort song. And if that's all true, how do we access these things? So I developed this encounter with the Lord and taught everybody. And as I was teaching this, the Lord brought my song back to memory. And I started hearing the bridge of the angels and what the angels would sing in tandem with us as Jesus would enter the throne room. And I could hear all the harmonies. And here's the crazy part, you guys. Like, yes, I was musically trained. I've never been taught piano by a person. I just have been able to play, and I can read chord charts, and then my hands just know what to do with chord charts. And I know how to write sheet music, but I'm not a fluent in it. But I could hear all the harmonies and the dissonances and the strings. I'm not some child like prodigy, but the only thing I can think of is the stories I used to hear of Mozart, how he would go to a full symphonic presentation and be able to come home and write it. I had a moment with this song that I didn't know how to put it on paper, but I could play the bass part, the cello part, the 3-part strings, the chorus, the harmony, the descant. I knew them all and I could play them. And I just kept that in the back of my mind. So about second or third time that I played the song at church, people started asking where the song was to be able to download it. And obviously I wrote it. So I was like, well, there's no recording. It's just me. And one of my friends was like, well, you should make a recording. So I took her seriously and was like, okay. And I came home and I Jimmy rigged up my podcast equipment as a makeshift recording studio downstairs on my piano. Took a tutorial on YouTube on how to do GarageBand and muddled my way through in a week, being able to put together a rough edit of Lift Up Your Head so people could have it to worship outside of church. And I sent it to my mom and my sister and my husband. I was like, what do you guys think? And the response was awesome. How many artists again out there? When you do something that produces a response from other people, when it's your own work, sometimes it's surprising to have people respond in the same way that you do to your art, because when you form it, it doesn't seem as novel. if that's the right words. And so it's not being self-deprecating, but it's just like, wow, like that's really, you're really feeling what I felt in this. And unbeknownst to me, my sister lives in the neighborhood of a gal that is done really well for herself in the music world. And my sister texted her the song. And what ensued, and I want to really make sure that I'm not over exaggerating anything, but this is just God and his timing, that this woman reached out, was willing to have coffee with me, and all these doors that I couldn't open, that I didn't know how to do in my 20s, she flung them open for me in a 45-minute coffee date. And just a really beautiful woman that I don't know to the degree that she'll ever know how much it meant to me for her to say yes to that coffee date, and how much it meant to me for her to just open up doors, which probably seemed really normal and easy for her to do, that literally were like opening up doors to my heart that had been locked for 20 years. And that happened in October. By December 6th, I'd been connected with a recording studio in town. Had been able to vet the different companies you go through for copywriting and covering your music. So a song is copyright. I'm a BMI artist. I have my own production agency. Kind of feels like doing the book all over again, but with music. It is known to be known publishing, K2BK Publishing. And TuneCore is putting out the music. And I'm not saying that I signed some big label or anything, but in a 6-week period, I went from having a song in my heart with the Lord that I've treasured and shared with the people that I love in my immediate atmosphere, to being put on the fast track to make it available to everyone. And it is my deepest desire that when people listen to this, it isn't just another song that you download from Apple Music or Spotify, or that you heard at a conference, but this is born out of intimacy and encounter. This is something that I truly believe gives you a glimpse of what eternity looks like, and invites you into a posture that maybe we've never been afforded the opportunity to do as humankind just yet. And I know that seems like a really big thing to say, but I feel confident in that. I feel that the Lord, in the new things that are coming, in the maturity of the bride, is giving us a different posture and a different way to greet him and welcome him in. So without further ado, you can go on to iTunes and pre-order your copy of Lift Up Your Heads today, or you can wait until January 17th, and with the rest of the world, we can lift up our heads and lift up our hands together as the King of Glory is ushered in through my first song. That's the story of Lift Up Your Heads up to this point. I can't wait to see what God does with everything. And I know there's probably pieces that I even forgot, or pieces that some of you guys have been a part of that are also important to this story. But as my people, as fellow dreamers that think doors have been shut to things that you have had on your heart at certain stages of your life, or you let die, let me just tell you, God has a funny way of unlocking things and opening them and pushing them through at exactly the time that he's expecting them to happen. And it is always exceedingly abundantly better than you can ask or imagine. Have a great day. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for buying this song. Thank you for sharing it with people. Thank you for getting to come on this journey with me and just to see what's happening next. Love you all. Thank you for listening today. I hope you have found places in your thinking or belief systems that have been encouraged, challenged, or my hope, quite frankly, introduced to completely new concepts. You want to stay connected? Visit me at my website at knowntobeknown. That's the number 2 and a little b.com. You can go there to be a part of the blog or to submit to be a member so that when new podcasts and new blogs are released, you're the first to know about it. Can't wait to see you next time.